Hello, and welcome to Right to Be Wrong, the show that revives the art of conversation, accommodating varied views on sports, culture, politics, world events, and every topic under the sun. After all, you have a right to be wrong. Here are your hosts, Dave and Tony.
Tone, the Right to Be Wrong podcast, where I fire opinions off left, right, and center. I assault all your senses for the next hour. Are you prepared?
55 minutes is in the contract, Dave. I'm not putting up with this for an hour.
59?
55 is the number, Dave.
All right.
And I'm not budging on my 42% minimum word count.
You accountants, tight asses, won't even give me one minute more than, you won't even throw in a free minute. It's Christmas. Give me a Christmas minute.
I know, Dave, you know what? Let's take the big issues today. I think we've been a little bit safe the last 3 or 4 weeks. We had a great episode.
I don't like safe.
We had a great episode last week that's going to drop in a couple of weeks or maybe early next year in the lead up to the World Cup of Soccer, which was fantastic. But, let's delve into something you and I have banged around on the periphery of for the better part of this year, I'd say, in terms of why it happened, the impact that it's had, the benefit that we first saw when it happened, and now the cost that we can feel in everything that we do.
That sounds to me very much like you're talking about us being in bed with the dragon.
Ooh.
It's China.
What's her name?
The China. It's not the Mauritian queen. China dragon. Hey, honey.
The China.
That's why she's the Mauritian dragon.
Wow.
If I called her the Mauritian dragon, that'd be the end of the Right to Be Wrong podcast. I'd be dead, but she's the Mauritian queen. But no, it's the China virus.
So, Dave, what do we specifically? We are talking about getting in bed with the dragon and this massive growth, massive focus, and massive reliance now on China. Is it fair to say that the world economy, or the Western economies, do not function anywhere near as effectively as they should or could without a heavy reliance on China?
Not at all. I actually think we're at the point where China's parasitized the host. And if you know anything about parasites and how they work, the very essence of them is not to kill the host, but to take over and have control and feed off the host.
I actually think me, you, an inflatable pool and some jelly, and we could call that podcast Parasitize the Host.
Parasitize.
Let me put my palms in you.
I'd love to I'm putting my opinions in you, Tone. But that's where I think we're at, and I don't think people realise. So, to go back to how this all started, we get to we'll skip everything in regards to the Chinese aspect of the Great Leap Forward and Cultural Revolution and Mao Zedong. We'll start at 1979. Mao Zedong's dead. Deng Xiaoping is in charge. There's a change in attitude towards the West from China, and it's sold to us as an opening up. Kissinger and Nixon had been in China in the 70s and attempting to normalize relations, laying the groundwork for foreign direct investment into China. And it's sort of sold as an opening up of the Chinese economy in a way in which both sides can obviously benefit. And that's the concept of free trade. The concept. It's not often how it works. So come 1979, China is obviously communist and it's pretty well, it's a mishmash of capitalism and communism. So if you're part of the Communist Party and you're connected to the Communist Party, you'll live in a capitalist world and everyone else lives under communism. So what happens in 1979 is they open up 4 special economic zones. And these special economic zones allow for foreign direct investment. You'll get a whole bunch of benefits, and they vary from, depending on the company and the size of the investment and where you locate yourself. But effectively, it's things like tax-free. They'll establish the factories. They'll establish all the infrastructure around the factories. They'll do all these things so that you're basically going in and your company setting up and moving all your operations from, say, Australia, the US, UK, wherever you're manufacturing, moving into these special economic
Can we just
zones.
pause there? Because you're saying that at that stage, open up the 4 zones. I own a massive manufacturing plant in Western Sydney, and I want a lower cost manufacturing. I want to look at a lower cost manufacturing option. The Chinese government at the time, or the Communist Party, would joint fund or partly fund or help me get over there and set up and get through all the red tape and everything else to be able to get manufacturing over there.
Correct. So what they would do is, and there were two sort of key elements. So again, it depended on the size of your business. So it might be where they'd wear the entire cost of the establishment of your new factory, take care of or assist with the hiring of staff and so on and so forth. So it depended obviously on the size, that the benefit you got, the industry you were in, but that's effectively what it was. Now, these special economic zones were Shenzhen, Guangzhou, mental block on the other two, I should remember, Suzhou, I think, and anyway. But effectively, they're around the port cities.
Qingdao?
Right? So no, not Qingdao. They're basically southern. They're down near Hong Kong, a couple of them, and they're sort of southern ports, direct access to the shipping lanes of the South China Sea and the like. So one of the catches of this, though, is when you do it, you need a Chinese partner. So you either need to partner with someone privately that owns half the company, or a state-owned enterprise that owns half the company. Now, if you're with an individual businessman, effectively they were tied to the Chinese Communist Party anyway. So you'd say to yourself, from a Western perspective, why am I doing this? Well, you're making motor cars. So the Australian context, we're making Holdens in Adelaide, and let's say on average you've got 5,000 workers in the factory, and the average wage bill, I think the average wage bill when Holden finished up was nearly $100,000 per staff member, and this is going back into the 90s. It was very highly unionised and well paid.
Mind you, like Holden actually didn't technically finish up until 2013, 14.
Correct.
Remember they put the asset on the government, and the government said you can go.
Correct.
Which is fine. I got no problem with that.
Yeah, to a certain level, like there's nothing wrong with, if people know much about competitive advantage and comparative advantage, and effectively what it is you focus on producing
stuff that you're good at.
What you're good at, and you can make cheaper and better than your competitor. Rather than say a suite of 10 goods, you might focus on 3, and that's where it works.
Which is really good.
It works
until you realize you don't make anything cheaper and better than China.
Correct. Well, that's exactly right. And that's where we'll get to through the podcast. And one of the other things too is you're still reliant upon the problem with these concepts. I'm sort of jumping ahead a bit, but capital is fluid. So if you turn around and you do all this, and then suddenly a whole country, you take that comparative advantage model and you say, we currently make 1,000 things in this country. But these 10 things, we have better factor endowment, so that's the natural resources and whatnot. They're a better quality. We get the stuff out of the ground locally. Our finished product's better than anyone else. Let's focus on that 10. And then someone turns around and advances their technology, and or what you do is no longer needed. Well, you've shrunk all your industry, and now the capital moves to another country. It says, well, out of those 10 things that the world really needed, we only need 7 now, and now those 7... 5 of them, they're doing better, and the other 2 are near enough is good enough. So we're taking our capital and we'll go elsewhere, and suddenly you've hollowed out your entire economy. But so what actually was happening was, paying $100,000 per employee compared to paying, say, $5,000, and they probably weren't even paid that high, but $5,000 per employee, you're making the money on the labor arbitrage. Right, so even if your input costs were the same, so on the assumption that you had been paying the same rent for a factory or purchased the same price, or the iron ore and all the inputs into it were the same, you're still making a massive gain on the labor arbitrage. Now, how that was sold to the public is, well, you will get these goods cheaper. So you no longer have to spend $3,000 for a washing machine. You can get one for $700, and it's got all these other functions that it makes your breakfast and sweeps the floors and all these sorts of things. So that's the overarching concept of what took place.
But you said this started in the late 70s, right?
This was 1979 is when they opened up. The groundwork's laid in the 70s.
Yeah. So 79 opened up the 4 zones.
Yeah.
How come, well, mind you, I was only in my teens, I suppose, but I never saw this like in the news, for example, throughout the 80s, right?
Well, it was like a slow start, right?
But at some point, there must have been a tipping point where people have gone, hang on.
Yeah,
not people. Corporates, right? Trying to generate that arbitrage, trying to generate additional margin, return for their investors. There must have been a tipping point. They've all gone, either we're going to be first or we're going to be fast followers. But at some point, it's gone, no, let's all go over there.
Yeah, because it was the Ricky Bobby philosophy.
If you're not first.
You're last. So what started to happen is the competitors were starting to undercut you on price, right? So all of a sudden, they're selling a TV at $500 cheaper than what you can. So you've got two choices. Either you say, well, we're a better product on the assumption you were, or you follow suit and off you go. Now, again, in theory, this all sounds good. You say, well, okay, we in Australia or in the US, and it's much more prevalent in the US, and it's one of the foundational things that brings Trump to power in 2016, is there's also a point as a corporate where you've got to be very careful. It sounds great in theory. You go, right, our costs are 50% lower than what they once were. We sell our product into the market 20% cheaper than what it was. We now sell 2 times the product annually, but at some point, if there's no job replacement, so as you offshored, if you didn't create new industries and new jobs for the people it displaced, at some point 2 things happen. One is they either have no job at all, and there's inevitably some because not everyone can upskill and learn to code as they told everyone, only to find out now that AIs come for the coders. But it also suppressed wages. So as a company, when you're trying to sell, you're at the point now where you go, well, we took your jobs. We didn't help replace your jobs. We took your money when you ran out of money. We financed you. Now that you're maxed out and you still don't have a job that can pay off the debt, what do? So there's 2 things come about.
And I get that. I get completely. But let's just say I'm the CEO and I'm representative of the board of that company you speak of. Why is it my problem to find people a job?
It's not. It's your problem to find future customers.
Agreed.
And that's where the flip side of that, you think to yourself, your obligation as a CEO, as a CFO, well, basically all your executive and the board, is to maximize profit within the laws of the game and manage any potential reputational damage that might occur the way in which that is your fiduciary obligation, right?
But realistically, I could maximize profit by halving my volume.
You could, right? There's lots of things you can do. But again, what happens, anyone that's good at business, and by good at business, you could be the local barber, but you go, that guy's been in that location for 60 years. He's got 2 houses. He had 3. He gave one to the first wife. He's about to give one to the second wife. Like at the end of the day, being successful doesn't mean multinational, right? So longevity, profitability, stability. So someone that's supposed to be a leader in C-suite, it's very easy to turn around and say margin, right? And I get it. What I'm talking about here and what we're talking about 1979, so 2025.
Yep.
And things start to manifest themselves 15, 20 years ago, but it's really the last decade where it's exploded and people are realizing low wages, no jobs.
And that's across multiple Western economies.
Correct. So it's the consistent through line, right? We've all made the same mistakes. So if you look at that, and let's assume 1980 is a round figure, it kicks off, and we really start to see the significant issues in 2015, right? Yeah. And I'd suggest earlier, but we'll be generous. That's 35 years. So then you say to yourself, well, let's go back to the CFOs and the CEOs of the late 70s into the 80s, into the early 90s. That's quite a long horizon, right? So in other words, for them, some of them probably didn't even think of it. They're probably not even smart enough to think of it. And I know that sounds really arrogant, but sometimes people are not. They'll look and think, but I'm great. Look at me increasing margin by 5% per year, and I'm doing this and I'm doing that. But they don't have that vision to go, yeah, but you know what's going to happen? You're going to run out of clients.
I know, but do you think when those decisions were being made, I'm pretty sure I know how you're going to answer this. The West clearly underestimated the aspiration, right, and the thinking of the Chinese.
100%.
Like I'm talking almost to the point where they were arrogant.
Correct.
They're a low-cost manufacturing base, so we'll just keep on pumping them with widgets to make, and they'll just keep churning them out at a labour cost of 0.6% of gross margin as opposed to 26% in any Western economy, and we'll still be able to control them.
Correct.
Right?
And
But then, Dave, as that builds up, and the Chinese, I honestly believe that they could have seen this coming.
The Chinese knew what they were doing.
So they go from not just buying from China. They start building inside China. So the Chinese start developing R&D centers, focus on innovation, just-in-time supply chains that stretch across the globe, but at the core of these just-in-time supply chains is who? China, right? So as they kept on ratcheting up the reliance, the Western economies keep on ratcheting up the reliance on China without even knowing it, to the point now, and a lot of people have said this, that it's just too late now, right?
Well, before I answer the too late part, let me be clear about my position in this episode. My position is a criticism of Western policy.
Absolutely.
The flip side is a congratulations to China, right? Because I've lived in China. I see the way things are. I see the way things are run. I don't want a system, for the most part. There are some things they do very well that I'd like to replicate. For the most part, I don't want a Chinese system. I don't want to live under that system. And anyone that's lived there long enough from the West would agree, right? Now, that doesn't mean I'm not going to give them kudos, because they knew what they were doing. This was a long-term goal. China's history, China's been a great power. In fact, the Chinese word for China is Zhong. I was going to say Zhongguo, but Zhongguo is like Chinese person. But it means Middle Kingdom. And China's been a power throughout history. If you go back through and look at the GDP and all the measures of wealth in society, China's been like one of the top 5 countries forever, with the exception of post-1908 Boxer Rebellion up until sort of 1979. And to them, they often don't teach about this period even within China, because it's considered sort of a dark period where the West came in and the Opium Wars, and the last Chinese Emperor Puyi loved hookers and opium, and sort of oversaw the demise of China, right? So for them, what they were doing, this was part of a long-term vision to reclaim what they perceive as their rightful place at the head of the world, right? So that's what's going on. So for me, whilst I'm criticizing us, I give them great long-term vision, right? Yep. They're doing. Now, one of the reasons that I think the West made a mistake, apart from they play on our greed, because that's what it comes down to, individually and collectively, I think one of the mistakes we made is the West looked at the success of post-World War II Japan, post-World War II Germany, the tiger economies of Asia like Singapore and Taiwan and the like. And I think one of the mistakes that was made is they had control of what was going on in those regions. They won a war. There's boots on the ground. MacArthur, for example, was in charge of overseeing the complete rewriting of the Japanese constitution. So it's very easy to invest and rebuild when you're in control. The mistake that was made, they had no control over China. So China taking a long-term view of what they are doing, if they turn bad, how were you going to control it without any boots on the ground? So for me, I was going to write a paper on China's great modern generals, and the thesis was General Motors and General Electric. And so, effectively, the West built the modern Chinese military.
Yep. But if you look now, Dave, like where the Chinese are pushing into, so they've got this massive industrial capacity, they've got a massive financial base, and they're increasingly shifting out of, not shifting out necessarily, disproportionate investment going into what I would call the high-tech sectors, robotics, AI, machine learning, all of that, right, at a much faster pace than the West.
Yeah, or in a massive arms race with them.
That's right. And they've got the capacity to do that. And that's one bend. The other area where they've got massive capacity to invest in is military, right? And this is something like we've created the monster, right?
Oh, we've definitely created the monster.
So the short-term view and the short-term thinking that I was going to say, and correct me here, the short-term thinking that is a byproduct of capitalism, right? In terms of incentives, that drives the numbers for the next year or 2 or 3, right? Because you and I, the bean counters in the mid 80s in some companies, going, you know what? If we outsource this in the next 2 years, our profit's going to go up 26%. We can pay high dividends, and it's going to kick off our bonus program.
And you literally just nailed the last word you said was the key of that statement. Because I saw the other day, I knew this story, but I saw it on YouTube and it reminded me again. The Ford Pinto, Ford made a car called a Pinto. This is like, I think, the 70s. I can't remember if it was the engineers, design team, whoever. Someone goes to the senior executive, says, actually, we need to recall them. It turns out there's a problem that if it gets hit in the rear, because the fuel tank was in the rear, if it gets hit in the rear, this angle, it's likely to explode, and we estimate 3,000 deaths per year. Accidents rear-ending our Pintos. We need to recall it. The C-suite, literally, and anyone can Google this and look it up, the C-suite turn around and say, what's the recall going to cost? And then they calculated, if we give each family $4 to $5 million for each death, that's cheaper. Our stock price won't tank. We'll make more money. And literally they're happy for 3,000 people a year to die because it was financially more beneficial.
Yeah.
And this is why it surprises me with COVID, where people swallowed the bullshit, because we've had thalidomide, where they knew that it was causing birth defects, but the money was too good, so they kept selling it. Ford, James Hardy with asbestos. Inherently, what the trouble is, people always get shocked that we get, 2, 3, 4 generations in, and the older generation is watching the younger generations repeat the mistakes of the past and go, throw your hands in the air. How do we not learn? And the reason being is two things. One is we obviously, stupidity and greed revivify at a rapid rate, because every generation that comes forward doesn't have the knowledge of the generation before it, so they make the same mistakes, they do the same things. And when it comes to what's happening with China, this is very much a long-term game. And when you say, is it too late, the answer is yes and no. Like, there's a lot of damage that's been done, but every empire rises and falls, right? So there's no point at which there's no return. But if you are saying, is it too late for the West to address without a significant cost that's likely to result in a significant reduction in the medium term living standard? Yes, it is. Because what it would mean is we'd have to accept that your laptop's got to last you 6 or 7 years. You can't replace them every 2 years. You can't have 5 TVs in the house. Like all your cheap products, we could get them manufactured in other places, but you're likely to pay a little bit more money. But the question becomes, are you better off with a job and a more expensive item, or no job and cheap items?
Well, what's one of the key planks of any government in a Western economy, Dave?
Well, it's your role to keep your people employed.
That's right. What does employment provide?
Employment provides security and standard of living. Lets you buy a house, lets you raise a family.
But in Australia, employed people with a wage, and a fair wage for the work that they do, also contributes to 60% of our GDP being consumption.
Exactly.
Right?
See, for me, why I think the globalist types have no issue with China is because they're the types that don't want boundaries. And in a utopian world to them, the Klaus Schwab types, as he openly says, you'll own nothing, you'll be happy, yet they'll own everything. They will have a world central bank, a world central currency, a borderless world, where they don't want people that have what we would call a living wage. And mind you, there's got to be part of this problem is also taking some personal accountability, right? Because when we say living wage, well, what's a living wage mean? If you ask someone, the living wage might be, I'm in a 1-bedroom apartment, I can pay my bills on time every time, I'm not eating dog food, and once every 3 years my family can have a nice holiday somewhere, right? Where someone else, it's like, no, my kids need to go to private school. I need to be able to pay for their college or university, as we call it. I need to replace my car every 3 years, and my house needs to be, in a high-class location. So we need to take accountability and say, well, what is it that we want? And us as consumers, we over-consume today.
That's right. We've spoken about this before.
Yeah, it's
over the period of our
ridiculous.
lifetime. Over the period of someone's lifetime 40 years ago, they might go through, this is a very basic example, 5 fridges.
Yeah.
Now we're going to, 2 fridges. Now we're going through 7. Right?
Yeah, remember the old fridges, the Kelvinators, that when we were kids, you go to your grandparents or maybe even your parents if you're old enough like us. And literally, it was as sturdy as. It was built like a tank, and those things were lasting 30, 35 years.
Yeah, so Mum and Dad literally just got rid of one, put it out of the council cleanup last week. And it was, what's that, 91? What's that, Dave? 25?
That's
34 years.
Yep.
34 years, right? Now, it spent the last 10, 12 years of its life in the garage as a second fridge, mate. It's still kicking over.
See, to me, one of the things when we talk about how do you address this from a policy point of view, because again, you and I, for the most part, are small government, less intervention, autonomous life. For us, I'd probably suggest that a right to repair would be a good way. So you can't have things with designed obsolescence. You can't have it where, in 7 years' time, the cost of the part's $450 and then a new one $650.
Yeah.
So if we turn around and we start working on right to repair legislation where maybe people we need to get back to making something that lasts 30 years and we make our money out of the service calls because it can be repaired every 8 years.
And I get it. And for me, that's like a common sense approach, but
it's not often accused of that.
No, but I just think if you start down that path, Dave, in the wrong hands, that level of government intervention could just overwhelm us.
Yeah, look, I don't want to on everything, but if people don't wake up that what's going to happen, and this sounds like it's conspiracy, but in the path we're going, start teaching your grandkids or your kids Mandarin now, right? Because if you think that's bullshit, well, how do you think the British Empire ruled the world? There were Byzantines, there were Mongols, there were Ottomans. Like this is the reality of the world. We're not going to hit this kumbaya where everyone turns around and say, "Oh, this is our little piece and that's your little piece, and we'll all be nice." And because the reality is, someone's going to turn around and go, "Well, they'll do it cheaper."
Yep.
I don't like the way you live. Because the issue we have. It's not something where you say, is it so bad that another country rules the world? Well, sometimes the answer is no, if they're benevolent and they're a beacon of leadership in the world. Not saying they're always perfect, but they're a beacon of leadership. But do you want to live under, let's say, for example, Putin turns around and they go back to an old, this was a Nazi Germany thing that once you had 8 kids, you never paid taxes again for life, right? You're considered a great mother of the Reich. And Putin turns around and goes, 8 kids, there'll be no taxes. You'll be put on a pedestal. And Russia in the next 50 years turns around, because we're not going to invade them because they're nuclear. Russia in the next 50 years turns around as where we've got declining birth rates and they're having 8 babies per woman and they're back up to 500 million people and they're technologically advanced. Do you want to live under a Russian-ruled world? And so when you start to think of things through just a little bit common sense, you start to realize actually there's more to this than just going, I'll accept my stuff's made in China. It's deeper than that. What it is if they're the power, they're the greatest economy, what happens? If you're spending 5% of GDP and your GDP's $1 million, you spend 5% on the military, it's not much of a military. If your economy is $10 trillion, spending 5%, now, what happens once you've got a good military? Well, there's 2 types of military. The first thing is to rule the waves. You need a navy. There's a coastal navy and a blue water navy. A blue water navy means you have capacity to project your power around the world, a la sending battle groups the way the US does. So let's say China gets to the point where its GDP per capita is equal to the US. So on the assumption the numbers are real at 1.4 billion Chinese, because there are some question marks over that, you're talking about an economy that is nearly 5 times the US. So on the assumption then that all they do is they match the spending as a percentage of their GDP as the US does,
5 times.
They'll have 5 times the battle group. So that means they'll have like 60 aircraft carriers. So how easy is it to control things when you can just park 6 aircraft carriers, one outside each state of Australia? And why wouldn't you if you think you've got that sort of power?
Yeah, but I think for me, that gets back to this. They want to expand their sphere of influence. Correct. Now,
and
all I would say
does.
is
we
that's
do
right. All I would say is, what has the US done in every region of the world almost since World War II? Try to exert influence on the back of economic.
What has every superpower done?
That's right.
This is the history of the world.
Exactly. And all I'm saying is, well, it's the Chinese's turn. And I'm not saying, well,
it doesn't have to be the Chinese's turn.
I know, but what I'm saying is, I don't see at the moment, unless someone takes a pretty sharp pivot in a couple of areas, how that's not going to be the case.
Well, there are some like Peter Zahan that argue that China will collapse in the next 10 years. And getting to my comment that there's some people that argue China's population is not what they say it is. They've certainly got debt issues, because one thing about China is they've built whole ghost cities and infrastructure to nowhere. So, but this would be a longer, deeper sort of separate or a part two of In Bed with the Dragon, to go into where they're at, how much truth there is. But you don't want to be at a point where you just accept the inevitable.
No, I get it.
If you have an ability to change things.
I know, but Dave, everything I'm seeing, all right, it's almost like this semi-conscious stepping into the inevitable without doing much about it. Like, what does the tariffs and the trade war that's been kicked off a year ago, and this trying to quarantine these critical minerals and some of the semiconductors, and trying to whack China over their head. We're going to be hard on them. All it's done in a lot of ways, Dave, is just redirected goods through Southeast Asia, right, and still out to the people buying them. You know what I mean? So
yeah, we need a far bigger, like it can't just be a military containment strategy, tariff strategy.
But what I mean, Dave, in order for us to have like you think about Australia and you think about some of our exports, and I'm not even talking about the dirt in the ground. I'm talking wine. I'm talking seafood, right? I'm talking other goods that we send to China. Like, you take that out straight away, right? And what happens to our standard of living?
Yeah, correct. Which gets back to my earlier comment, right? It's not too late, but it's probably too late to do it without a significant cost.
That's right. So, and that's what I'm saying. Now, so we actually can address this issue, but politically it's going to sound like we're going to go through a lot of pain, right?
There'll be, if done well, there'll be some pain. If done poorly, there'll be a lot of pain.
Okay, what's your confidence in either political party on either side of the aisle in Australia to have the political will and the capital and the guts to actually do something meaningful in this regard, to take your country on a journey of a bit of pain, but to become more self-reliant?
I would bet my life on it, Tony, because the West has such amazing leadership.
Now, if we're not going to get monetized for that comment, I don't know what's going to get us over the line, Dave.
No, I don't have anything, because I actually think I don't think you can take a singular approach either. I think if Australia attempted to do it, the pain would be worse. I truly believe that Western society, so the US, UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Western Europe, needs to actually have a China plan. And that China plan will have both a collective aspect and will have domestic aspect. So what I mean by that is the collective might be the military aspect, and we say, well, look, the reality is here's where they're at militarily. The overtures on Taiwan, what's our strategy there? Do we defend? Do we leave it? Then when you work it out, what's our strategy on defending Japan and South Korea and all the peripheral states around it? So militarily, this is what we're going to work on. But domestically, what you then need to say is, well, okay, we do export all this wine, iron ore, beef, wheat, so on and so forth. What are we going to do to both bolster alternative exports, and what are we going to do to open up new export markets that can either grow or replace what might be lost in the future? Now, one of the things I think is not being done well is I do think at the moment a lot of that manufacturing, getting back to the top of the episode where the labor arbitrage, you're saying, well, I'm not paying 5,000 times $100,000 salaries. I'm paying 5,000 times $5,000 salaries. A lot of that's dead now. So you can reshore, because the automation means those 5,000 Chinese in a factory are only 50 people now anyway, because the factory is all automated. So what we should be doing is we should be focused on that, saying, well, actually, how much manufacturing can be done locally? So what's the cost if Germany manufactures its own X widget and we manufacture our own X widget? And where's the benefit that, no, Australia still does a Y widget better, so we'll do that, and so on and so forth. And one of the things when you talked about what we do, data centers are a very big aspect going forward for AI. And they take up 4 to 5 times the energy of the average data center. So I want to do a whole episode, should Australia bet the farm, AI go, and talk about we should be establishing data centers for the world. We can get proper energy policy because we've got nuclear, we've got gas, we've got all these things that would underpin the energy needs of that. And at the same time, talk about what are all these new markets, what are all these new things we're going to do, that we're not just going to cut our nose off to spite our face immediately when it comes to China. But we do realize it's like now or never, and start to actually come up with things that 20 years' time when you and I are retired, or hopefully sooner, but we can actually say, wow, yeah, there has been some progress on the matter. And what happens is once you get to a certain level of progress too, China will be forced to come to the table, because then it's going to say, well, how much can we rely on our domestic economy, and how much is our influence around the world waned because they've started to wake up to our game, and that we're not able to achieve the things that we're hoping to achieve, or certainly not in the next 20 years.
Fair call, Dave. Fair call. Let's just run through some stuff here, Dave. I want to talk about some items where I think the West is hooked, right? And we're overly reliant, almost totally reliant on China, and how we potentially unpick it. Not necessarily how we unpick it, but let's just have a chat around. So we've spoken about rare earths and critical minerals, right? Batteries and clean technology, right? Heavily reliant on China in terms of the data here tells me 80% of global solar panels, most lithium-ion batteries, and a big majority of EVs are made in China. And then pharma and chemicals. So the Western defense and pharma industries rely heavily on chemicals that Chinese produce, right? So that's a pretty big pillar when it comes to being reliant on China. If you think about some of the things the West tries to do or wants to do, they actually can't move that quickly unless they get cooperation from China. China's literally got a hold on the tap.
Well, this is why Trump's trying to get a deal with Ukraine over some of their critical minerals and rare earths. It's also Australia has a good number, but again, you know, we've got a cult of people here that just don't want to dig anything out of the ground.
I think it's changing, Dave. I think
Real is an undefeated champion, right? And power bills and industry dying is punching people in the face.
We also, I think, didn't we just ink a deal with Trump on critical minerals as well?
Yeah,
right. And for me, as an Australian taxpayer, I would exploit that deal to the cows come home.
Correct.
I get US, you want some? Hey, China, what do you want to pay for it? No, they're paying more, right?
Yeah.
Just play them off against each other.
Well, do you remember our Trump trying to bang episode as well, where I said that we don't have the capacity to defend ourselves against China, and we should be hosting a greater number of US personnel and equipment, even if that means ports that can facilitate, you know, a battle group, so a whole aircraft carrier and the like. To me, that should have been tied into our critical minerals and rare earths deal.
Yep.
We should have been turning around and saying, can our AUKUS and say, look, those submarines, that's not what we need, but we're going to build facilities to host yours.
That's right.
And we'll wear the cost of maintaining those facilities. It'll create jobs for people doing this providing the provisions, food and the like, doing the service work, all those sorts of things. Or if this big Australia policy, also lay out what is this big Australia policy? What's the number? How long? How much of this is tied into it? Where are these regions that we can create whole areas around where we're going to be developing these things and start moving people into those regions?
Because we've spoken about that before, Dave.
We literally...
Like, where's the plan? Like, if one of the governments said, let's just say either the current opposition or current government said, by the year 2100, when you and I are long gone.
We will be long gone by then.
The population of Australia is going to be...
The Right to Be Wrong podcast will be run by Paddy, Don and Will.
That's right. It's going to be...
The three amigos.
The population of Australia is going to be 120 million, right? And we all go, what? We're 27 now. How are we going to get there? And they lay out a plan, right? And it tells us how, why, what's going to be migration, what's going to be investment, where we're going to be living. Like any type of plan from any side of politics to understand what we're going to be and why, and then test that with the electorate, I would be happy with. At the moment, there is no plan other than
There's nothing.
40 million.
Yeah, plus another 13.5 million in the next 40 years. Where to me, part of this countering China thing and moving off, you know, stop sucking on the China teat, is to actually come up with this. What's the nation building plan? What's the number? If that's the case, what skills do we need? if that's the case, what are our alternative markets for our existing exports that will continue in the future, and what are the new exports we can have?
Absolutely.
How many data centers can we host? Like, how much money can we bring in hosting data centers for everyone around the world? Because we do have the gas, the uranium, the coal. What is it that we can create for the era of AI and machine learning?
Absolutely.
Because it's not going to be solar panels and electric vehicles.
I came across a great quote, Dave, when I was doing a bit of research. So in the energy and climate space, so China's the largest coal burner and emitter, but also the biggest builder of renewables, okay?
Yep.
And then this great quote around, while China depends heavily on imported oil and gas, the Middle East and Russia, the West is increasingly dependent on China's equipment to decarbonize in terms of the investment in renewables.
And in fact, and this is something this is my hypothesis, not something where I like, look, 2 and 2 is 4. I know, like doing international relations, going through stuff under the tutelage of the great Dr. Peter Moak and the like, talking about Clausewitz and strategy on war and what's your end goal. Like, why do you start war? Before you start, you should have an exit strategy. You should stick to your goals. Don't expand it, so on and so forth. I have no doubt that China's exporting of renewables to us is part of their long-term strategy. Because if you think renewables are the be-all and end-all, and I'm not saying some of them don't have a place, but if you think they're the be-all and end-all, why are you exporting to the West but won't use it all yourself? You're still burning coal and you're doing all those things.
But in a lot of ways, they are investing a lot in renewables in China. Like
they are. They're also building a coal-fired power plant.
That's right.
Each week.
What I'm saying is, but over the course of time, and we're not talking for them the next election cycle, because last time I checked, there are no elections in China. I'm talking longer-term view. They don't want to rely on Australian dirt in the ground.
No, and that's the next problem we have. And I'll get to that in just a sec. But as part of, I believe that they're exporting equipment that they know they've got control of the software and they want to, and that's part of the long-term strategy to again parasitize the economic systems of Western society, which to them is their enemy, right? As much as we do trade, to them we're the enemy, right? We're a clash of cultures. How they see the world, how we see the world, very, very different. What was it that you just said before I went back to that?
We're talking about how China requires oil and gas from Russia and the Middle East, right?
Yeah, that's something.
And then
I've lost it.
And then the West relies on China for all its equipment to decarbonise.
But no, there was something. Hopefully, it comes back to me. Although, as they say, it must have been that important. I forgot that. But and
then so in terms of energy, because we had a podcast a while ago, energy security
is national security.
So China now fields the world's largest navy by number of ships, and the world's largest standing armed forces. Okay,
yes.
So that economic reliance that we've created on Chinese output has built this military base and power that they can start throwing their weight around a bit in a very Chinese style of way. Right now, Western militaries and Western governments surely must have some concern, there must be a risk matrix somewhere that says, if the shit goes down in the South China Sea over Taiwan, what if they yank the chain on critical minerals, electronics, drones? What if they cut off all the shipping routes?
This is what I'm talking about.
What happens?
That long-term strategy, right? That's what part of it is because you turn around and you just flick a switch and we've got 2 million BYD sitting on our roads that go nowhere, and you've got solar panels that no longer work and all these different things that, that's what they can do. But when you said when the shit goes down, in my head was Cypress Hill. When the shit goes down, you better be ready. But that's what I was going to say. The reason why the Chinese have such a large standing army and more ships is not for defense of their homeland, because they're nuclear.
Yeah.
Right? And North Korea is nuclear. And it showed you don't need a blue water navy. You don't need the technology. You just need nuclear weapons. You're not going to be invaded. Right? So China's not building this great army just to stay where they are.
Yeah. I would love to see whoever he is at the moment, or she is, the person playing the role of Hans Blix.
Yeah.
Hans Blix, you cocksucker.
Fuck your Hans Bricks. For everyone doesn't know what we're talking about, watch Team America.
But I didn't realize, Dave, that China recently has actually shown its willingness to use rare earths as like a political tool or a military tool, and kind of yanked I think they yanked the chain once on Japan, and they actually introduced some export controls as well in 2023. So it's funny from a security perspective, Dave. Western militaries have to plan for the possibility of conflict against China using weapons that are partially dependent on Chinese control inputs.
Yeah.
I would say that is a collective grab of the testicles and a squeeze.
Yeah. Although the same sort of thing's happening because Western Europe is still buying Russian gas.
That's right. That's right. But
they're fighting a war with Russia.
That's right. So they're buying Russian gas to help fund partly and support Ukraine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is what goes on. It's a strange world. And it's been like this even in the Second World War. There was some funny, entanglements of supply chain and the like. But it's, as we've talked through this, I hope it's getting people to start to think about the position we actually find ourselves in. And the Chinese knew this. They play a long game. This wasn't, a good Chinese friend of mine that we studied together. He said to me, he came out here, was meant to return home when he graduated, but still here 20 years later. And he says, America's stupid, bro. He says, America. Oh, no, it sounds like a Kiwi accent, but he was hanging around one of my mates, so his English is like that. He says, America's stupid, bro. He says, they send all their money and stuff, and they not think about what we're going to do long term. They're stupid.
This is a Chinese mate.
Chinese mate.
Yeah.
So he's, he doesn't have a Chinese accent. He's got the accent of one of our other mates that taught him his English.
How funny. So, Dave, in terms of where we stand now, there's like mutual dependency, right? There's stuff that they need from us that helps fuel their industrial base, but also helps fuel some of the intangibles they're trying to build.
But some of the things they buy, they don't need, by the way.
But I think increasingly the West
won't use their own because something goes wrong. Then they know they've got it, so they're stockpiling.
The thing is, Dave, that if there was a race to a finish line where the West in one lane and the Chinese in the other lane are trying to get to the point where they can reduce those vulnerabilities most effectively and the quickest. So how can I get to point B if point B means I no longer need the West for anything, right? And how can the West get to the point where they no longer need China for anything? China's always going to win that race.
Well, they are at the moment because, as we mentioned in a previous episode, the CEO of Ford went over and did a tour of their factories and was blown away by the automation and the humanoids and what's going on. But this is another thing that we've let our Western universities be corrupted by because the Chinese opened up a lot of things called like Confucian institutes and a lot of Chinese money into Western universities. And they were doing it for a number of reasons, but to sort of infiltrate, to steal. So they steal a lot of IP. Yeah, but there was a situation, I won't name the university because this isn't one of those ones where I'd really want to attack it, but there was a situation where they found out one Chinese academic had like 20 PhD students. And to give you an idea, if you're supervising 2 or 3 PhD students, that's a massive amount of work for an academic. So to have 20 and they're all getting their names on papers and as co-authors, and it was just a rort, and they obviously had to move him along. But there's, even me, when I lived in China, I was in China on a William Chu scholarship. So that was money that was given to the university and for my scholarship to go. So part of that was the soft diplomacy too, get people like me over there and go, oh, well, this is nice. No, the Chinese are really not that bad. And and by that, when I say China, it's not that bad, not attacking Chinese people.
But dare I say, they're not the only sovereign state in the world that has a far-reaching influence in academic institutions across the Western world.
No, not at all. And look, to be honest, this is part of normal. You want to expand your influence around the world. You want to grow your empire. You want to, be a leading economy. These are all parts of the things that you have to do. But I think we're at a turning point where, if we don't start making some changes and start diversifying the economy, be a bit more aware to the risks, we could find ourselves in a situation that we're really not going to like.
I agree. So I think the focus needs to be de-risking or diversifying away from China, and then understanding what that looks like and be ready to accept a level of discomfort for your country and your economy as you de-risk and diversify away.
There's plenty of countries in Asia that could do with our goods. Help them grow their economies.
But my biggest, I'm not overly concerned, right? Because I just think this is the byproduct of a lot of bad decisions by a lot of greedy Western countries and companies that have led to this, and they never played the long game. But it does concern me to an extent that my kids are going to be completely reliant on Chinese output or China for their standard of living, where you and I might have started at 20% of GDP and now it's up to 60% or whatever it might be. So that does concern me, but how we de-risk and how we diversify away and how we make sure through that transition we continue to maintain a good standard of living so that our kids can do some of the things that we did. And this is only in isolation, Dave, because there's so many other challenges that make that more difficult in Australia at the moment.
Because some of the things, if you look at one of the other things when you said one of the flaws in our system is that we look to the quarter or the month, right? So capitalism and an inherent flaw in capitalism incentivizes short-term thinking because that's
right.
the metric on profit, right? At the longest, companies will look to the year, but often they're looking to the quarter, the month, right?
But even call it 3 years.
Yeah, where they literally, the Politburo gets together for a 5-year plan and they have a 100-year plan.
That's right.
And on top of that, the other inherent flaw in our system is that we have elections. And I say that, and I mean this seriously. I'm not advocating for dictatorships or do away with them. I know that the democratic system is the best system, right? However, there's a big difference between, Albo and Bobo running a policy, a clown show here in Australia, and this is not me saying this has been great, just what we're at. The Don, changing his mood depending on who's been in his ear that day. Keir Starmer, the clown, like all these people will be gone soon, right?
But Dave, replaced with who?
But let's even assume all of it. Let's assume everyone was replaced with perfection, right? But in the US, that'll only be, let's say it's JD Vance. It's still limited. He's still got 2 terms. Let's say it's Nigel Farage over in the UK. We know that at best you really run 3.5, 4 terms. You're considered wow as a prime minister, right? And that's unlikely to happen. So where Russia and China don't have this problem.
That's what I mean, Dave.
They can literally wait out administrations. They can say, here's our plan. All right, we've got a bump in the road because Australia actually finally got someone with some political acumen. The US has got someone with some political acumen. The UK's got someone with some political acumen. But don't worry, this will be cyclical. 10 to 12 years tops, might be shorter, and then we're back on with our plan.
But the flip side is, Dave, absolutely they can wait it out. But if they see an opportunity to leverage a position, like Russia at the moment's going, we got to get as much done as we can while Donnie's in there.
Oh, no, I think it was get as much done as it could while Biden was in there. Because when did the war start?
I beg to differ.
Well, here's some evidence for you. When did they take Crimea?
Dave, I got no idea. All I know is
what did they take under Trump 1.0?
Nothing. Right.
What did they take under Biden?
Ukraine, or part of Ukraine.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying, Dave,
so
is like
the reason now I'm not saying that.
Anyone who knows anyone, right? I cannot believe they've allowed, under this guise of you guys sort it out for yourselves, walking away from NATO for different reasons. I can't believe that. I actually believe by Russia, by the end of the midterms or by the end of this current administration, if it goes to a third term or JD Vance, I think Russia will have everything that it wants in terms of the Ukraine.
I think it's already got it.
And maybe a little bit more.
It's already got it. It had it from the time across the border, it had it. But from the time the war started.
But the fact is, Dave, it was going to be gone in 3 days. And we're 3 years in and he still hasn't got it.
No, but actually they were in Kiev. He pulled back as part of a gesture because Boris Johnson made overtures. The Ukrainians, with the backing mainly of Bojo, that they would, in good faith, pull back from Kiev because they actually surrounded Kiev and negotiate. And there was a peace plan that was on the table, that was a really good one that everyone, like, this is not hearsay now, it's on, that Boris Johnson literally told him not to take, right? Now, there are two things. One is, this is not me saying, like, to me, Russia won a long time ago. Now, that doesn't mean I'm not saying that Russia got exactly what it wanted and the price was going to be, say, $1 billion. It's got what it wanted. The price has been far higher, right? So they still got what they wanted, but it's probably cost them 10 times. When I say he hasn't done anything under Trump, this is also not me saying because Trump is so politically astute on foreign policy, it's because Trump is so erratic, which means you hold back.
Yeah.
Well, we know what Obama, in fact, there's rumors that Obama literally knew and allowed him to take Crimea on the basis that he didn't do it until Obama had won his second term. So this is not an argument to say Trump is so great. This is just an argument to say sometimes when you're erratic, you can't do things.
Yep.
And actually get back onto our thesis, this is one of the important things of a strong economy, right, is that a company will not invest in a region. So it might not be Bunnings want to set up a brand new thing in Mount Druitt, right? If their shop is being robbed every night and firebombed and whatnot, you won't invest in a country if it's not safe, right? So you need law and order to start with. You need a guarantee you're going to be getting your money back if need be. So one of the things Australia needs to do is it needs to start looking at all those things and say, well, do we have that in China? Does the West have it in China? And if not, why not? And where else can those things be found for our future? Because it is time to start really looking after Australia. It's time to make Australia great again, too.
I think it is, Dave, but a lot of the topics we've touched on in the last year have been big, chunky issues where I actually just don't think politically we have the will or the courage, let alone the resources, to be able to deliver that kind of change. It has to be incremental. And a lot of this stuff should be just bipartisan.
Yeah,
But everything becomes a political edge where, he's too soft on China. Okay, let's go hard on China like ScoMo did and stuff up half our industries when they just slapped us hard. There's got to be a way we navigate.
If you're going to go hard, you need to have already set up your alternative.
That's right, and we didn't.
And this is why getting to Russia, this is why, contrary to what people think, Russia and China don't care, because when they got kicked off the SWIFT system, which is the international payment system as part of the sanction, they didn't care. The chip system was already set up with the BRICS doing trade. And all the central banks have been buying gold off the charts, which is half the reason gold's going through the roof. And according to latest estimates, China's buying 10 times the amount of gold that it's actually declaring, which means is China, looking to a pseudo gold standard again and, trading with the BRICS. So again, it's a deep conversation, but in short, for someone that doesn't know what BRICS are and the SWIFT system and chips and so on and so forth, the point is that China, if 1.4 billion, India at 1.5 billion, Russia at 150 million, Brazil, so on and so forth. Like when you add those numbers up and who's trading in that block, it's something like I think it's either just under or just over 50% of the global population.
Yeah, I get it.
So in other words, it's time for us to wake up before we become the minority. And what I mean by that is like in trade, and we're now at the behest of others, because there's always going to be a bigger fish. There's no point thinking you're going to get to this egalitarian, everyone's equal stuff on a global stage. So do you want to be the small fish or do you want to be the big fish?
Yeah. And I don't think we'll ever be the big fish, Dave. But everything.
No, but what we can be is those little fish that swim alongside the sharks.
Yeah. But everything we face now is a byproduct of decisions that we've made.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So now
we're reaping what we sowed.
So now I say, have your medicine. Have your medicine and then start thinking about the decisions you can make in future to make sure that you can either minimize or de-risk the current situation that you face. Otherwise, keep on taking your medicine until you learn. And I think politically at the moment, populism over policy is a real big problem for the West, and that's something that Russia and China don't need to deal with.
And I say, 你好，我叫大卫，我学习汉语在上海大学。
Is that right to be wrong?
谢谢你。
In Mandarin?
No.
Okay. What do we say, Dave?
You have a right to be wrong.
Take care, mate.
Thank you for listening to this episode, and we hope you enjoyed it. Like us on Twitter Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. Please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify.